Imagine worrying about paying rent one minute and insulting a Primordial Alpha the next. For Remy, the Night King isn't just a bedtime story. He's the terrifying man standing in her shop, reeking of ancient rot. She's the only one brave, or foolish, enough to tell him he has bad breath. But instead of tearing her apart, he pulls her close and dares her. Taste it yourself. Now she is the only cure for a dying king who will destroy a city just to keep her safe. Ready for a romance that bites back? Please like this video, subscribe to @Sarah Werewolf Romance Collection, and let us know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Let the obsession begin. Chapter 1. The Rot. The problem with bottling emotions for a living wasn't the long hours. It was the smell. Most people thought lust smelled like expensive perfume or roses. It didn't. It smelled like burnt sugar and sweat. Greed smelled like cold pennies. Regret tasted like ash in the back of your throat. I wiped my hands on my apron, trying to scrub a particularly stubborn stain of jealousy, sour milk, off my thumb. "Echo, stop it!" I snapped without looking up. My shadow, which was currently detached from my feet and stretching across the brick wall like a bored teenager, flickered. It formed a thumbs-down symbol. "I don't care if you're bored," I said, corking a vial of Monday morning motivation, coffee, and ozone. "We have rent to pay, and unless you plan on robbing a bank, we stay open until 9. My shop, the 9th Ward, was tucked into a narrow alleyway between a laundromat and a sushi place in downtown Chicago. To the average human, it looked like a hipster candle store. To the others, the wolves, the fae, the witches, it was the only place in the city to get a potion that actually worked. Outside, the autumn rain hammered against the glass. It was a miserable Tuesday, the kind of night where the city felt heavy, like a wet wool blanket. I was just reaching for the closed sign when the bell above the door didn't chime. It stopped. The little brass bell usually rang when the door opened, but this time, the clapper froze mid-swing. The air in the shop, usually warm and smelling of dried sage, dropped 20 degrees in a second. Echo, my shadow, didn't just flicker, it vanished. It dove under the counter and hid behind a box of mason jars. Coward, I thought. Then I looked up and I understood why. The man standing in my doorway took up too much space. He had to duck slightly to get under the frame. He wasn't wearing a cloak or some ridiculous mystical armor. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire inventory, a black trench coat dripping with rain, and leather gloves. He looked like a CEO who had just fired half his staff for sport. But it wasn't his height or his clothes that made my stomach drop like I'd missed a step on the stairs. It was the smell. My nose twitched. The scent hit me like a physical slap to the face. It wasn't sweat or cologne. It was dirt. Old, cold, wet dirt. The kind you find at the bottom of a 6-foot hole. It mixed with something sharp and electric, like the air right before a lightning strike. He closed the door. The sound of the rain vanished instantly, cut off as if he'd sucked the noise out of the room. He walked to the counter. His movements were fluid, too smooth for a guy that size. He didn't walk, he glided. "I need something for sleep," he said. His voice was deep. Not the sexy, gravelly kind you hear in movies. It was the kind of deep that rattled the jars on my shelf. A bass note that you felt in your chest bone. I didn't move. I just stared at him. He had dark hair, slicked back from the rain, and eyes that were a startling molten gold. "We sell melatonin at the pharmacy next door," I said, leaning my hip against the counter. I kept my tone bored. It was my best defense. "This is a specialty shop." He pulled a glove off. His hand was large, pale, and covered in faint, moving tattoos that looked like shifting smoke. He placed a thick stack of cash on the counter. "I haven't slept in 10 years, he said. "The pharmacy cannot help me." I looked at the money. It was enough to pay my rent for 6 months. I looked back at him. The smell was getting worse. It was suffocating. It tasted like decay, like something beautiful that had been left to rot in the dark. It made my gag reflex twitch. This man wasn't just an insomniac, he was cursed, deeply, violently cursed. "I can't serve you," I said flatly. His golden eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "Take your money," I said, waving a hand in front of my face. "And please, for the love of God, take a step back." He didn't move. In fact, he leaned in closer. The air around him crackled. The lights in the shop flickered. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. It wasn't a threat. It was a genuine question, like he was surprised I wasn't trembling on the floor. "I don't care who you are," I lied. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I have a sensitive nose. It's how I work, and you—" I crinkled my nose, unable to hide the disgust. "You reek!" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a car. He stared at me. For a second, he looked genuinely confused. Then, the gold in his eyes darkened to pitch black. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched out, reaching toward his boots. "I smell like expensive scotch and rain," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Or so I've been told." "You've been lied to," I shot back, crossing my arms to hide that my hands were shaking. "To me? You smell like a grave. You have bad breath, buddy, the kind that comes from a rotting soul. So unless you want a mint, get out of my shop." I waited for him to kill me. I waited for the claws or the magic or the punch. He didn't strike. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. It didn't reach his eyes. "Rotting," he repeated softly. "You can smell the rot." "I can taste it," I snapped. "It's gross." He moved faster than I could track. 1 second he was on the other side of the counter, the next he was right in my space. He gripped the edge of the counter on either side of my hips, trapping me. I gasped, pressing my back against the shelves. Jars clinked behind me. He wasn't touching me, but the heat coming off him was intense. He leaned down until his face was inches from mine. Up close, the gold in his eyes was swirling, like liquid metal. "You are the first person in 5 centuries to tell me the truth," he whispered. "Personal space," I choked out, trying to turn my head away. The smell of grave dirt was overwhelming. He didn't pull back. Instead, he dipped his head lower, his nose grazing my jawline. He inhaled deeply, sniffing me. "If you think the scent is strong," he murmured, his lips brushing against the sensitive skin of my ear. My breath hitched. My entire body went rigid. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. The danger in his gaze was gone, replaced by a dark, starving hunger. "Taste it yourself," he said. And then he crushed his mouth to mine. I expected it to taste like dirt. I expected to gag. It didn't. It tasted like dark chocolate, ozone, and pure, raw power. It was electric. A jolt of energy shot straight down my spine and curled in my toes. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was a claim. It was hard, demanding, and terrifyingly good. For a second, the world stopped. The rain, the smell, the fear, it all vanished. There was just him, and the way his mouth moved against mine, stealing the air from my lungs. Then, just as abruptly, he pulled away. He stood up straight, adjusting his cuffs as if he hadn't just assaulted a shopkeeper. He looked at me, his chest heaving slightly. I stood there, stunned, touching my bruised lips. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice rougher than before. "I will send a car at 8. "What?" I squeaked. My voice was an octave too high. "You can taste the curse," Cyrus Kovac said, turning to the door, "which means you are the only one who can cure it." He walked out into the rain. The bell didn't chime. I slid down the front of the counter and sat on the floor. Echo poked his head out from behind the mason jars, looking at me with wide, white eyes. "Shut up," I whispered to the shadow. "Just shut up." Chapter 2. The Aftermath of Ozone. The problem with kissing a Primordial Alpha wasn't the fear. Fear I could handle. Fear smelled like cold copper, and I dealt with that every time a low-level warlock tried to haggle over prices. No, the problem was the aftertaste. An hour after Cyrus Kovac walked out of my shop, I was still sitting on the floor, tracing the line of my bottom lip. The taste of him, dark chocolate, static electricity, and that terrifying, addictive undercurrent of raw power wouldn't leave. It coated my tongue. It made the rest of the world taste bland, like cardboard. "You're doing it again," I whispered to the empty room. Echo, who had finally crawled out from behind the mason jars, stretched across the floorboards. He elongated his shadowy neck and mimicked a swooning maiden, holding a hand to his forehead. "I am not swooning," I snapped, throwing a rag at him. The rag passed harmlessly through his dark form and landed with a wet thwack against the skirting board. "I'm processing trauma. That was assault, or something adjacent to it." Echo formed a question mark on the wall. "No, I'm not calling the police," I muttered, hauling myself up. My knees popped. "You don't call the cops on Cyrus Kovac. You call a mortician, or an exorcist." I locked up the shop, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to turn the deadbolt. The rain had stopped, but the city felt different, heavier. The walk to the subway station usually smelled like wet asphalt, garbage, and the stale exhaust of the crosstown bus. Tonight, though, the air felt scrubbed clean. It was too quiet. The usual hum of Chicago, the distant sirens, the shouting, the car horns, sounded muffled, as if someone had wrapped the entire block in cotton wool. I swiped my Metro card and pushed through the turnstile. The platform was empty except for a businessman asleep on a bench. I sat down, pulling my coat tighter. "He said 8 o'clock, I said to the air. "He thinks he can just summon me." Echo pooled around my boots, vibrating anxiously. He pointed a shadowy finger toward the tunnel. I looked. At the far end of the platform, where the lights didn't reach, the shadows were moving. Not normal shadows cast by pillars or trash cans. These were liquid. They slithered along the tiles, defying the light sources, inching toward me like oil on water. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "He's watching!" The train screeched into the station, a deafening metal scream that shattered the silence. I scrambled on board, choosing a car with flickering lights. The doors hissed shut, severing the connection to the creeping darkness on the platform. I didn't breathe until we were 3 stops away. My apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that realtors politely called up-and-coming, and everyone else called dangerous. I unlocked my door, desperate for the smell of my own sanctuary, dried lavender, old books, and the vanilla candle I left burning. I pushed the door open and froze. The smell hit me first. It wasn't lavender, it was moonflowers, rare, night-blooming pom-poms that only grew in soil touched by fey magic. They smelled like sweet milk and helium. They were expensive, illegal actually in 3 dimensions, and they were everywhere. Pots of them lined my windowsill. Bouquets of them sat on my tiny kitchen table. Vines of them were draped over my thrift store sofa. My cramped apartment looked like a botanical funeral parlor. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on a dropped petal. There was a card on the table, resting against a vase of white blooms that glowed faintly in the dark. I picked it up. Heavy, cream-colored cardstock. No name, just 5 words written in an elegant, sharp hand that looked like it had been carved with a knife. "Sleep well. I won't." I crumpled the card in my fist. The scent of the flowers was cloying, suffocatingly sweet, trying to mask the memory of the grave-rot smell that clung to him. But underneath the sweetness, I could still smell it. The ozone, the storm. He hadn't just watched me. He had been here, in my space. "He thinks he can buy me?" I hissed, kicking the door shut. Echo slid up the wall and covered his eyes. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to war. Chapter 3. The Skunk and the Rolls. The next morning, I arrived at the 9th Ward armed. I wasn't carrying a gun. I was carrying something much worse. In my satchel, nestled between a half-eaten bagel and my keys, was a vial of essence of skunk. It wasn't actually from a skunk. It was a distilled concentration of social rejection. It smelled like sulfur, gym socks, and that specific shame you feel when you trip in public. I had brewed it for a client who wanted to keep her mother-in-law from visiting. It was potent enough to make a maggot gag. "If he comes back," I told Echo as I flipped the sign to open, "we aim for the eyes." The day passed in a blur of anxiety. Every time the bell chimed, I jumped. But it was just regulars, a stressed waitress needing a calm balm, a college kid wanting a focus tincture. At 7:55 p.m., the street outside went quiet. It happened exactly like the night before. The ambient noise of the city just died. The traffic stopped. The pedestrians vanished around corners. A car pulled up to the curb. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, matte black, swallowing the light from the street lamps. It looked less like a vehicle and more like a hearse designed for a villain in a Bond movie. The rear door opened. He didn't step out. A driver did. A man built like a vending machine, with a neck distinct only in theory. He wore an earpiece and a suit that struggled to contain his biceps. A beta wolf. I could smell the wet dog obedience on him. He walked into the shop. The bell gave a pathetic little ding. "Miss St. Clair," the driver rumbled, "Mr. Kovac is expecting you." I stayed behind the counter, gripping the skunk vial. "Tell Mr. Kovac I'm busy. I have inventory to count." The driver didn't blink. "It wasn't a request." "And this isn't a negotiation," I retorted. "Get out." The driver sighed, a sound like gravel shifting. He reached for his belt, not for a weapon, but for a phone. "Sir, she's refusing." He listened for a second, then paled. He held the phone out to me. "He wants to speak to you." I glared at the device. I shouldn't take it. I should lock the door and run out the back. But curiosity, or maybe stupidity, made me reach out. "What?" I snapped into the phone. "Remy." His voice traveled through the line and vibrated straight into my molars. It was low, intimate, and sounded exhausted. "I'm not coming," I said. "I don't do house calls, especially for entitled alphas who break into my apartment and turn it into a greenhouse." "The flowers were an apology," Cyrus said, "for the kiss." "That wasn't a kiss," I argued, my face heating up. "That was a branding, and you still have bad breath." A low chuckle, dry and humorless. "Then come fix it." "No." "I'll give you double whatever you made last year." "I'm not a prostitute for potions, Kovac." "Remy," he said, and the tone shifted. The command was gone. In its place was something jagged. "Please." The word hung there. A primordial alpha saying please? It unnerved me more than the threats. It smelled like desperation. I hesitated. "If you don't get in the car," he continued softly, "my driver, Kale, has instructions to carry you. And he is not as gentle as I am." I hung up. I looked at Kale. He cracked his knuckles. "Fine," I spat, grabbing my satchel. "But if you try to touch me, I'm breaking this." I held up the skunk vial. Kale looked unimpressed. "Yes, ma'am." I marched out to the car. Echo hesitated at the threshold of the shop, swirling anxiously. "Get in the bag, Echo," I hissed. My shadow detached from the floor and zipped into my satchel, hiding among the glass bottles. I slid into the back seat of the Rolls-Royce. The leather was soft as butter. The interior smelled like him, ozone and deep, ancient earth. It was nauseating. It was intoxicating. "Where are we going?" I asked as the car purred to life. Kale met my eyes in the rearview mirror. "The Spire." Of course. The tallest, blackest, most ominous building in the Chicago skyline. The headquarters of Kovac Industries. The castle of the Night King. I clutched my bag to my chest. I was walking straight into the beast's den, armed with nothing but a bottle of stink juice and a sassy shadow. God, I was an idiot. Chapter 4. The morgue in the sky. The elevator ride to the penthouse took long enough for my ears to pop 3 times. There were no buttons. Kale just placed his palm on a scanner, and the metal box shot upward like a bullet. When the doors slid open, I expected opulence. I expected gold statues, velvet curtains, maybe a throne. I stepped out into a refrigerator. The penthouse was vast, walled entirely in glass, overlooking the glittering grid of Chicago. But it was empty. No furniture except for a single stark white sofa facing the window and a massive steel desk. The floors were polished black marble. The air was frigid and smelled of nothing. Literally nothing. It was sterile, filtered, dead. Cozy, I muttered, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. Kale didn't follow me out. The elevator doors slid shut behind me, sealing me in. "Hello," I called out. "Over here." I turned. Cyrus was standing by the far window, looking out at the city. He had shed the suit jacket. He was wearing a white dress shirt, unbuttoned at the cuffs, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked worse than yesterday. Even from 20 feet away, I could smell the rot. It was pungent today, sharp and acidic like a battery leaking. His posture, usually so imposing, was rigid, as if holding himself upright cost him physical effort. I walked toward him, my boots clicking loudly on the marble. Echo peeked out of my bag, saw the height of the windows, and immediately ducked back inside. "You live here?" I asked. "It looks like an Apple store designed by Dracula." Cyrus didn't turn. "I don't sleep. I don't entertain. I don't need clutter." "You need a heater," I said, rubbing my arms. "It's freezing." "The cold helps," he murmured. "It slows the spread." He turned around then, and I sucked in a sharp breath. Yesterday, the shadows and the rain had hidden the details. Under the harsh, sterile lights of the penthouse, there was no hiding it. Black veins were spiderwebbing up his neck, pulsing slowly under his pale skin. They disappeared into his collar and reappeared at his wrists. His lips were tinged blue. The golden eyes were dull, rimmed with red. He looked like a marble statue that was cracking from the inside out. "Jesus," I whispered. The snark died in my throat. "You see it," he stated flatly. "I see it," I said, stepping closer despite my instincts screaming, "Run." "And I smell it. It's corrosive." "It's a curse," he said. "From an elemental warlock I fought a century ago. I thought I killed him. Clearly, I didn't finish the job." He walked over to the white sofa and sat down heavily. The grace was gone. He moved like an old man. "Why me?" I asked, stopping a few feet away. "You have billions of dollars. Hire a team of healers. Hire a witch coven." "I did," he said, leaning his head back and closing his eyes. "They all said I was perfectly healthy. They couldn't see the veins. They couldn't smell the rot. They told me it was psychosomatic." He opened his eyes and pinned me with that molten gaze. "You are the only one who flinched, Remy. You are the only one who knows I'm dying." I stared at him. The Primordial Alpha, the Night King, the monster of bedtime stories. He wasn't a monster right now. He was a patient, and damn it, I was a professional. I dropped my satchel on the floor. I pulled out a pair of latex gloves and snapped them on. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. "Shirt," I ordered. He blinked. "Excuse me?" "Take your shirt off," I said, stepping into his space. I shoved the fear down and let the clinical detachment take over. "If I'm going to fix your breath, I need to see how deep the rot goes. Shirt off, now." A flicker of amusement crossed his pained face. "Bossy." "I charge by the hour, Kovac. Don't waste my time." He sat forward and began to undo the buttons. His fingers were stiff. As the shirt parted, I saw the extent of the damage. The black veins weren't just on his neck. They were a map across his chest, converging over his heart in a knot of bruised, pulsing darkness. The smell was awful. I gagged, covering my mouth with the back of my hand. "Bad?" he asked dryly, shedding the shirt completely. Catastrophic, I muffled through my hand. You're rotting from the heart outward. I reached out, my gloved fingers hovering over the black mass on his chest. This is going to hurt, I warned. I haven't felt anything but cold for 10 years, he whispered, looking up at me. Make me feel something, Remy. I laid my hand on his chest, and the lights in the penthouse exploded. Chapter 5. The Anchor. The penthouse was pitch black. I didn't move. My hand was still pressed flat against the center of Cyrus Kovac's chest, right over the knot of black veins. In the sudden darkness, the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy. It pressed against my eardrums like deep water. The hum of the city, the whine of the wind against the glass, the distant vibration of the elevator. It was all gone. Don't move, Cyrus whispered. His voice didn't sound like a rock slide anymore. It sounded stunned. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. The only light came from the city grid far below, casting long, skeletal shadows across the marble floor. I didn't mean to blow the fuse, I stammered, trying to pull my hand back. I have a lot of static electricity. It's an occupational hazard. His hand shot up and clamped over my wrist. His skin was ice cold, but his grip was iron. No, he rasped. Not the lights, Remy. The noise. I paused. What noise? The beast, he said. The screaming in my head. It's quiet. I looked at where my gloved fingers touched his skin. I couldn't see the veins in the dark, but I could smell them. The scent of the rot, that acidic grave dirt stench, had receded. In its place was something else. Petrichor, the smell of dry earth right after a storm breaks. It was clean, ancient. You're an anchor, he breathed, shifting closer. The movement brought his bare chest against the front of my jacket. I could feel the slow, thudding rhythm of his heart under my palm. It wasn't beating like a human heart. It was beating like a war drum. Thud, thud. Thud, thud. I'm a potion maker, I corrected, my voice trembling. I bottle smells. I don't do whatever this is. You are silencing the curse, he said. He leaned his forehead against mine. He was so tall he had to hunch over to do it. For 10 years, my mind has been a riot of hunger and pain. You touched me and it stopped. He inhaled sharply, pulling my scent into his lungs. You smell like sage and vanilla, he murmured. And fear. Why are you afraid? Because you're the Night King, I whispered, panic clawing at my throat. And you're holding me hostage in the dark. I would never hurt you. Your wolf would, I shot back. I saw the veins, Cyrus. You're losing control. If that thing wakes up while I'm standing here, I'm dead. He went rigid. The softness vanished. He released my wrist as if I'd burned him. You're right, he said, his voice dropping back to that cold, distant baritone. He stepped back, vanishing into the shadows of the room. A moment later, emergency lights flickered on, dim red track lighting along the floor. It made him look demonic, the shadows hollowing out his eyes. He picked up his shirt from the floor but didn't put it on. He just held it, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Kale will take you home, he said. I blinked. What? Leave, he commanded, before the noise comes back. I didn't argue. I scrambled for my satchel, checking quickly to make sure the glass vial inside hadn't shattered on the marble. It was intact. Echo was huddled at the bottom of the bag, looking like a terrified ink blot. I'm sending you a bill, I said, trying to regain a shred of dignity as I backed toward the elevator. For the consultation and the emotional distress. Cyrus didn't answer. He turned back to the window, staring out at the city. As the elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the view of his scarred back, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. A low, guttural growl. It didn't come from a human throat. Chapter 6. The Skunk and the Shadow. By the time I got back to the 9th ward the next morning, I was ready to liquidate my assets and move to a nice, magic-free farm in Iowa. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the phantom weight of his heart beating under my hand. I smelled the ozone. I tasted the dark chocolate. "We are closed," I announced to the empty shop, flipping the sign. "Indefinitely. Maybe forever." Echo slid out of my bag and onto the counter. He formed the shape of a $sign on the wall. "I don't care about the money," I muttered, grabbing a broom to sweep up invisible dust. "He's dangerous, Echo. Did you smell him? He's a walking corpse held together by stubbornness and expensive tailoring." Echo morphed into a heart shape. I swatted him with the broom. I spent the morning aggressively reorganizing the banishing section of the shop. I brewed 3 gallons of GTFO, a mist made of cayenne pepper and salt. I was just labeling the bottles when the temperature dropped. It wasn't the slow, creeping cold of the penthouse. This was instant. The windows frosted over. The sunlight dying on the floorboards turned gray. I looked up. Cyrus was standing in the center of my shop. I hadn't heard the door open. The bell hadn't chimed. One second the room was empty. The next, he was just there, as if he had stepped out of a shadow in the corner. He looked better than last night, which meant he looked terrifying. He was wearing a fresh suit, navy blue this time, and a gray overcoat. The black veins were hidden, but the tension in his jaw was visible. "You left your gloves," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out my latex gloves. He placed them on the counter. "You could have mailed them," I said, gripping the broom like a bow staff. "How did you get in? The door is locked." "I own the building," he said calmly, "and the lock." "I checked the deed," I countered. "The landlord is a shell company called Obsidian Holdings." "My shell company." I stared at him. "You bought my building. When? Last night?" "This morning, at 4 a.m. He brushed a speck of dust off his cuff. "I find that ownership simplifies access." "You are insane," I said, backing up until I hit the shelves behind me. "You can't just buy my life because I touched your chest once." "It wasn't just a touch, Remy." He took a step forward. The shop shrank. "The noise is back. The beast is screaming. I need you to silence it." "I am not a jagged little pill you can swallow to feel better," I shouted. "I am a person. I have a cat, sort of. I have a business." "I bought the business," he reminded me. "Now come with me." "No." He stopped. "No?" "I am not going back to that icebox," I said. "And if you take one more step, I will make you regret it." Cyrus tilted his head. He looked genuinely amused. "You have a broom, Remy. I am a primordial. The math is not in your favor." "I don't need math. I have chemistry." I dropped the broom and lunged for my satchel on the counter. My hand closed around the vial of essence of skunk. I uncorked it with my thumb in one fluid motion. "Warning you!" I yelled. He took a step. I threw the contents of the vial right at his chest. The liquid splashed against his expensive cashmere coat. Amber fluid soaked into the navy fabric. I waited for the smell. Essence of skunk was weaponized stink. It should have made his eyes water. It should have made him vomit. Nothing happened. The air smelled faintly of lemons. I stared at the empty bottle. I looked at Cyrus. He looked down at the wet spot on his chest, then back at me. "Did you just throw salad dressing at me?" he asked. My face went hot. I must have grabbed the zest vial by mistake. The labels look similar in the dark." Cyrus sighed. It was a long, weary sound. He unbuttoned his coat and shrugged it off, dropping the ruined, lemon-scented cashmere onto my floor. "You are difficult," he said. "I'm trying to be impossible," I retorted. "It's charming," he said, "but we are done playing." The shadows in the room surged. Before I could grab the cayenne mist, the darkness wrapped around my waist like a physical rope. It wasn't cold. It felt like velvet. It lifted me off my feet. "Put me down!" I shrieked, kicking the air. "We're going to the spire," Cyrus said, turning to the door. The shadows floated me along behind him like a balloon. "And you are going to fix me, properly this time." Chapter 7. The Diagnosis. "This is kidnapping!" I yelled as the elevator shot upward. "I am going to sue you! I will sue you in human court and wolf court!" Cyrus stood by the doors, watching the numbers climb. He had dissolved the shadow ropes once we were in the car, but Kale was blocking the exit. "You can't sue your landlord," Cyrus said tiredly. "It's a conflict of interest." The doors opened. We were back in the penthouse. It was still freezing. The white sofa was still there, but someone, probably Kale, had brought in a medical table and a cart full of equipment. It looked like a field hospital set up in a minimalist art gallery. "Sit," Cyrus ordered, pointing to a chair near the medical setup. "I prefer to stand," I muttered, crossing my arms. Cyrus ignored me. He walked to the window and leaned against the glass, pressing his forehead against the cold pane. He looked exhausted. The amusement from the shop was gone, replaced by that gray, trembling fatigue. "The skunk vial," he said quietly without turning around. "It was in your bag yesterday." "Yes." "Why didn't you use it then?" "Because you looked like you were going to die," I admitted. "I don't kick puppies, even giant, demonic puppies." He turned around. The playful banter was gone. His eyes were bleary. "I am dying, Remy. Faster than before." He pulled his shirt open again. I gasped. Yesterday, the veins had been a knot over his heart. Today, they had spread. Thick, black tendrils reached up to his jawline and down his stomach. The skin around them was gray and necrotic. The smell of rot filled the room instantly, overpowering the sterile air. "The contact last night," he rasped. "It quieted the mind, but it accelerated the physical decay. My wolf wants more of you. It is eating me to get to the surface." I walked over to him, the anger draining out of me. This wasn't a powerful king bullying a shopkeeper. This was a man on death row. "It's a parasite," I murmured, leaning in to look closely. "The magic. It's feeding on your life force." "Can you stop it?" I looked at him. "I can't cure a curse this old, Cyrus. I told you that." "I don't need a cure," he said, locking eyes with me. "I need time. I need to finish my work before I go." "Your work?" "There is a war coming," he said grimly. "If I die now, the city falls to the Sun Eater. I need 6 months. Can you give me 6 months?" I bit my lip. My synesthesia was going haywire. The rot smelled like death, but underneath it, he smelled like rain, like life. "I can brew a suppressor," I said slowly, my brain racing through recipes. "White willow bark, silver dust, and something to bind it to your biology." "Blood?" he asked. "No," I said, shaking my head. "Blood is too volatile. I need something that anchors you to the earth." I looked around the sterile, empty penthouse. Then I looked at him. "I need access to the Royal Conservatory," I said. "The garden in the sky. If the legends are true, you have plants there that haven't existed for 1,000 years. I need a moonroot." Cyrus stiffened. "No one enters the conservatory. It is sacred ground." "Then you die next Tuesday," I said flatly. "Your choice, Your Majesty." He stared at me for a long beat. The gold in his eyes flared. "Fine," he growled, "but if you touch the night bloom, it will kill you." "I'm good with plants," I said, grabbing my satchel. "Better than I am with people." "Then let's go," he said, pushing off the glass. "But stay close. The garden, it has a temper." "Great," I muttered, following him toward a hidden door in the wall. First a demon car, now a killer salad bar. My Yelp review of this job is going to be scathing. Chapter 8. The Oxygen High. The hidden door wasn't a door. It was a scar in the wall. Cyrus pressed his palm against a section of the seamless glass paneling that looked exactly like every other section. But instead of sliding open, the glass rippled. It liquefied, turning from solid transparency into a shimmering, mercury-like curtain. Biometric magic, I muttered, adjusting the strap of my satchel. Show off. It keeps the pollen in, Cyrus said. His voice was tight, strained. He was leaning heavily against the doorframe, his skin the color of wet chalk. The black veins on his neck were throbbing in time with his heartbeat, a visual countdown clock that made my stomach turn. He stepped through the liquid glass. I took a deep breath, checked that Echo was securely at the bottom of my bag, and followed him. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air changed. In the penthouse, the air had been sterile, scrubbed of all life. Here, the air was so thick with oxygen it felt like inhaling soup. It was hot, humid, and smelled violently green. It smelled of chlorophyll, crushed velvet, and things rotting in damp earth to feed new life. I blinked, my eyes watering. We were standing on a suspended metal walkway, floating inside a glass atrium that must have taken up the top 10 floors of the spire. It was massive, a jungle in the sky. But this wasn't a nice, curated botanical garden. This was a war zone. Vines the size of pythons were coiled around the support beams, their thorns dripping a viscous purple sap. Ferns with leaves as sharp as serrated knives brushed against the walkway railings. Far below, in the gloom of the undergrowth, glowing blue mushrooms pulsed like warning lights. "Welcome to the conservatory," Cyrus rasped. He loosened his tie, the humidity instantly making his shirt cling to his chest. "It looks like Jurassic Park," I whispered, gripping the railing. "Where are the dinosaurs?" "The plants ate them," Cyrus said. He wasn't joking. He began to walk down the metal grate path, his movements stiff. "Stay on the walkway, Remy. Do not touch the railing, do not lean over, and if you hear a clicking sound, freeze." "What's the clicking sound?" "The snapdragons," he said. "They hunt by vibration." "Snapdragons are flowers, Cyrus. My grandma grows them." "Not these," he said darkly. I hurried to catch up to him, keeping my elbows tucked in. My nose was overwhelmed. To a normal person, this place would just smell like a greenhouse. To me, it was a cacophony. I could smell the hunger of the vines. I could smell the sleep of the moss. It was deafening. "The moonroot," I said, trying to focus. "Where is it?" "The gray sector." Cyrus pointed toward the far end of the atrium, where the foliage turned from vibrant green to a ghostly pale silver. "It only grows in the shade of the widow's weeping willow." "You name things like a goth teenager," I muttered. "I didn't name them," he said, stumbling slightly. He caught himself on the railing. "Don't touch that," I yelped. Too late. As his hand gripped the metal, a vine near his wrist lashed out. It moved faster than a striking cobra, wrapping a green tendril around his forearm. Cyrus didn't panic. He didn't even flinch. His eyes flashed black, and a blade of pure shadow sliced from his fingertips, severing the vine instantly. The plant recoiled, hissing, actually hissing, retreating into the gloom. He straightened up, brushed a severed leaf off his sleeve. But I saw it. The effort had cost him. He swayed, his face going gray. "You can't use magic," I said, rushing to his side but hovering just out of touching range. "Every time you use shadows, the veins spread." "I defend myself or I become fertilizer," he gritted out. "Keep moving." He was stubborn. He was dying, and he was walking into a jungle that wanted to eat him. "Echo," I whispered to my bag. "If I die here, you have permission to haunt his ghost." Echo didn't respond. He was probably terrified of the shade. Chapter 9. The Gray Sector. The walk to the gray sector took 20 minutes. It felt like 20 years. The heat was oppressive. My shop clothes, a wool cardigan and jeans, stuck to me like a second skin. My hair had frizzed into a halo of chaos. Cyrus, meanwhile, looked like he was walking through a blizzard. He was shivering. The rot made him cold even in this sauna. We crossed a suspension bridge over a small, artificially created river. The water was black and smelled of ozone. There, Cyrus said, pointing. Ahead of us, the jungle changed. The vibrant, aggressive greens faded into a landscape of ash and silver. The trees here were pale, their bark looking like bleached bone. The leaves were translucent white. It was quiet here. The aggressive buzzing of the green zone vanished. The moonroot grows at the base of the central tree, Cyrus whispered. It is a parasite. It feeds on the magical runoff of the willow. We stepped off the metal walkway and onto the soft gray moss of the sector floor. It felt like walking on memory foam. Wait, I said, holding out a hand. I sniffed the air. Underneath the smell of damp earth and bone, there was something else. A scent I knew well from my shop, lavender and arsenic. It's a trap, I whispered. The plant is not sentient, Cyrus argued, stepping forward. It is an herb. Not the plant, I hissed. The air. The willow releases a neurotoxin. It smells like sleep. If we get too close, we pass out, and then the moss digests us. Cyrus stopped. He looked at the massive, weeping tree in the center of the grove. Its branches trailed on the ground, creating a curtain of white leaves. I can hold my breath, he said. For how long? You're already hypoxic, I pointed out, gesturing to his blue-tinged lips. If you pass out, I can't carry you. You weigh as much as a Honda Civic. He looked at me, frustrated anger simmering in his golden eyes. Then what do you suggest, witch? We need the root. I go, I said. I have filters. I reached into my satchel. I didn't have a gas mask, but I had a scarf and a vial of peppermint concentrate. Peppermint was a stimulant. It cut through sedatives like a knife. I uncorked the vial and doused my scarf in the oil. The smell was sharp enough to make my eyes water. I wrapped the scarf around my nose and mouth. Stay here, I ordered him, and don't die. Remy. I ignored him and stepped into the kill zone. The silence under the willow was heavy. The air felt thick, trying to push into my lungs, heavy with the sweet, deadly scent of arsenic. I breathed shallowly through the peppermint-soaked wool. It burned my throat, but it kept me awake. I knelt at the base of the tree. There it was, the moonroot. It looked like a gnarled hand made of pearl, glowing faintly in the gloom. It was beautiful, and it was pulsating. I pulled out my small silver gardening trowel, never leave home without it, and began to dig. The soil screamed. Not a loud scream, a high-pitched psychic whine that vibrated in my teeth. The willow didn't like having its parasite removed. Snip! I cut the taproot. The screaming stopped. I grabbed the glowing tuber and shoved it into my bag. Got it! I yelled, turning around. That was when the willow woke up. The white branches that had been trailing lazily on the ground suddenly whipped upward. They weren't branches, they were tentacles. Run! Cyrus roared from the edge of the grove. I scrambled back, slipping on the moss. A white branch lashed out, wrapping around my ankle. It burned like dry ice. I kicked at it. Let go, you overgrown salad! The branch tightened, dragging me backward toward the trunk. The tree trunk opened a vertical slit, a mouth, a wooden mouth. I clawed at the moss. I was sliding fast. Then the shadows exploded. Cyrus didn't just use magic, he became it. A wave of darkness crashed into the gray sector, blotting out the artificial lights. He tore through the moss, ignoring the toxin, ignoring the strain on his heart. He grabbed my outstretched hand. His grip was freezing. With a roar that shook the glass walls, he yanked me free of the branch and swung me behind him. He raised his other hand, and a wall of solid shadow slammed down between us and the tree, cutting off the tentacles. He fell to his knees. Cyrus! I ripped the scarf off my face and dropped beside him. He was convulsing. The black veins were moving visibly now, crawling up his cheek toward his eye. Got the root? He wheezed. I got it! I cried, grabbing his shoulders. Come on, we have to get out. You used too much. Had to, he gasped, a dark trickle of blood leaking from his nose. Couldn't let the salad eat you. Chapter 10. The vulture. Getting him back to the elevator was a nightmare. Cyrus leaned on me, his weight crushing. For a man who looked like he was carved out of marble, he was impossibly heavy. Every step was a battle. I could smell the ozone radiating off him in waves. His magic was leaking, uncontrolled. By the time the elevator doors opened at the penthouse level, I was sweating and shaking. "Kale!" I screamed as the doors slid apart. But Kale wasn't alone. Standing in the center of the penthouse, looking like she owned the place, was a woman. She was stunning. Tall, with sleek raven hair, and wearing a red dress that cost more than my entire life's earnings. She turned as we stumbled out. Her eyes were sharp, predatory, and amber. She took one look at Cyrus, bleeding, leaning on me, black veins crawling up his neck, and her expression shifted from arrogance to horror. "Cyrus," she breathed. Then she looked at me. The horror vanished. It was replaced by disgust. "Who is this?" she demanded, stepping forward. I bristled. "I'm his doctor. Who are you?" "I am Nadia Volkov," she announced, lifting her chin. "Alpha of the River Pack, and his fiancé." I almost dropped Cyrus. "His what?" Cyrus groaned, trying to straighten up. "Nadia, leave." "Leave?" Nadia laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. She walked closer, her heels clicking on the marble. She sniffed the air, her nose wrinkled. "You smell of rot, Cyrus, and you," she glared at me. "You smell like a hedge witch." "Scent alchemist," I corrected, tightening my grip on Cyrus's waist. "And right now, he needs medical attention, not a social call. So, move." Nadia blocked the path to the medical table. "He is dying. I can smell it. The pact states that if the primordial falls, the strongest alpha takes the city." She smiled, revealing teeth that were slightly too sharp. "If he dies tonight, I inherit the spire. Why should I let you save him?" "Because if you don't," Cyrus rasped, pulling away from me to stand on his own, swaying dangerously, "I will use my last breath to tear your throat out, Nadia." His voice was weak, but the threat was absolute. The shadows in the corners of the room flickered, responding to his anger. Nadia hesitated. She looked at the black veins, then at the shadows. Fear flickered in her eyes. "You're bluffing," she said softly. "You can barely stand." "Test me," Cyrus whispered. His eyes went pitch black. For a second, I thought she would attack. Then she took a step back. Self-preservation won. "Fine," she spat. "Die on the table, then. It saves me the trouble of challenging you." She stepped aside, her gaze burning a hole in my head. "Fix him, witch. I'd hate to inherit a corpse. It lowers the property value." She turned and stalked to the elevator. Kale, who had been standing silently by the wall, watched her go, his hand hovering near his gun. The doors shut. Cyrus collapsed. "Fiancé?" I shouted, catching him before he hit the floor. We crumbled together in a heap of limbs. "Political arrangement," he mumbled into my shoulder. "Never liked her." "You have terrible taste in women," I grunted, dragging him toward the medical table. First the salad, now the vulture. Chapter 11. The Bloodletting. I managed to heave him onto the metal table. He was barely conscious. The veins had reached his left eye, turning the sclera black. The rot was consuming him in real time. "Okay," I said, my hands shaking as I dumped my satchel onto the instrument tray. "Okay, focus, Remy." I grabbed the moonroot. It was glowing softly, pulsing like a heart. I threw it into a mortar and grabbed the pestle. I crushed it. It crunched like wet chalk, releasing a thick, pearlescent sap. "White willow," I muttered, grabbing a jar from my emergency kit. "Silver dust." I mixed them frantically. The paste turned a shimmering gray. "Cyrus," I said, leaning over him. "I need the binder." His eyes fluttered open. They were hazy. "Binder?" "The anchor," I said. "The biological link. I need your blood. Fresh. Primordial blood acts as a catalyst for the moonroot." He stared at me. He didn't argue. He slowly extended his arm, wrist up. The pale skin was tracked with black lines. I grabbed a scalpel from the medical tray. It was sterilized, wrapped in plastic. I tore it open. "I'm going to cut you," I said, my voice trembling. "Just a small incision. And I have to add mine. The anchor requires a two-way connection." "Do it," he whispered. I pressed the blade to the inside of his wrist first. His skin was tough, harder than human skin. I had to press down. A line of red welled up. The smell hit me instantly. Molten copper, dark chocolate, and the air before a hurricane. It was intoxicating. My synesthesia flared, painting my vision with bursts of gold and indigo. I held the mortar under his wrist, catching the drops. 1, 2, 3. Then I turned the blade to my own palm. I hissed as the sharp steel bit into my skin. I held my hand over the mortar, letting my bright red blood mingle with his darker, ancient drops. The mixture hissed when our blood collided. The gray paste turned a violent, glowing violet. It bubbled, releasing a scent that was neither him nor me, but something entirely new. "That's enough," I said, grabbing a bandage to press against his cut, then wrapping a spare strip of gauze around my own stinging hand. But Cyrus didn't pull his arm back. He caught my hand, the one holding the bandage. "Remy," he said. His voice was clearer now, fed by the proximity of his own blood and my scent. "I have to mix this," I said, trying to pull away. "You have to drink it." "You smell it too," he said. It wasn't a question. The blood. "It smells like copper," I lied. "It smells like iron." "Liar," he murmured. "You smell the bond." He tugged me closer. I was leaning over him, the scalpel still in one hand, the mortar in the other. His gaze dropped to my neck, where my pulse was fluttering like a trapped moth. "Drink the potion, Cyrus," I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. "Please." He stared at me for one agonized second, then he released my wrist. "Give it to me," he said roughly. I poured the violet sludge into a beaker and held it to his lips. He drank it in one swallow. He grimaced. "Tastes like dirt," he groaned. "It's a root," I said, stepping back and stripping off my gloves. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might pass out. Dirt is the primary flavor profile. Chapter 12. The Fever Break. The reaction was immediate. Cyrus arched off the table, a guttural roar tearing from his throat. "Cyrus!" I dropped the beaker. It shattered. He convulsed, his muscles locking up. The black veins on his neck flared bright purple, then began to recede. It looked painful, like they were being burned out from the inside. He thrashed, sweeping the tray of instruments onto the floor. Scalpels and clamps clattered across the marble. "Hold him down!" Cale shouted, running from his post by the elevator. "No!" I yelled, throwing my hands out. "Don't touch him! The magic is venting. If you touch him, it'll kill you." Cale skidded to a halt. Cyrus rolled off the table, crashing onto the cold floor. He curled into a ball, shaking violently. Steam, actual steam, was rising from his skin. It smelled of burning sickness. I dropped to my knees beside him, keeping a safe distance. "Cyrus, look at me," I commanded. "Stay with the sound of my voice." He groaned, his fingers clawing at the marble, leaving deep grooves in the stone. "It burns." "That means it's working," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. "The root is purging the rot." For 10 minutes he writhed on the floor. It was agonizing to watch. I wanted to reach out to soothe him, but I knew my touch would only confuse the magic. I had to let the potion do its work. Finally, he went still. The steam dissipated. The room was silent. "Cyrus?" I whispered. He lay flat on his back, breathing heavily. His skin was pale, sweat slicked, but the black veins were gone. His lips were no longer blue. He opened his eyes. They were gold, pure, bright, molten gold. No red rim, no black sclera. He blinked, looking up at the ceiling. Then he turned his head to look at me. "Hi," I said weakly.
"You poisoned me,"
he rasped, but there was no anger in it. "I cured you," I corrected. "Or at least, I bought you your 6 months." He sat up slowly. He rolled his shoulders, testing the movement. He looked at his hands, turning them over. The tremors were gone. He looked at me, and a slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. It was the first time I'd seen him smile for real. It transformed him. He didn't look like a dying king anymore. He looked like trouble. 6 months, he said, pushing himself to his feet with a fluid grace that had been missing for days. He offered me a hand. I looked at it. I looked at the drying blood on his wrist. "I'm billing you for the scalpel," I said, taking his hand. He pulled me up, but he didn't let go. He pulled me straight into his chest. He was warm now, fever hot. "Bill me for whatever you want, Remy," he murmured into my hair. "I own the building. I can afford it." "You're welcome," I muffled against his shirt. "Now," he said, pulling back to look at me with intense clarity. "About that fiancé." "The vulture?" "The vulture," he agreed. "We need to discuss why she thinks the position is vacant." "I don't care," I lied. "I'm just the doctor." "You," Cyrus said, tucking a stray curl of frizzy hair behind my ear, "are the only reason I'm breathing. That makes you the most important person in this city." My stomach did a traitorous little flip. "Don't get sentimental, Wolf," I warned. "The potion wears off in 180 days. You're still on a deadline." "Then we better get to work," he said, "because the Sun Eater isn't going to wait." Chapter 13. The Afterburn. The silence in the penthouse was different now. Before, it had been the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. Now, it was the charged, electric silence of a downed power line. I sat on the cold marble floor, my legs sprawled out in front of me, staring at the shattered remains of the beaker. My hands were sticky with the residue of the moonroot paste, a glowing violet sludge that smelled like crushed pearls and lightning. "You okay?" The voice came from above me. I looked up. Cyrus was towering over me. The transformation was terrifying. 10 minutes ago, he had been a dying man, gray-skinned and shivering. Now, he looked like a god of war who had just stepped out of a furnace. His skin was flushed with heat, his chest heaving with deep, greedy breaths of oxygen. The black veins were gone, erased as if they had never existed. His eyes were a blazing, unholy gold. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice shaking. "Just waiting for my heart rate to drop below 300. He reached down. This time, I didn't argue. I let him pull me to my feet. His grip was hot, fever hot. The potion had jump-started his metabolism, and he was radiating energy like a nuclear reactor. When he pulled me up, he didn't stop. He pulled me right into his personal space, his hands settling on my waist. "You did it," he murmured, staring down at me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "The noise, it's gone. It's completely silent." "Enjoy it," I breathed, pushing lightly against his chest to create some distance. "It's a rental. You have 6 months before the lease on your sanity expires." He laughed, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through his chest and into my palms. It was a rich, dark sound, unused to being used. "6 months is a lifetime," he said. He finally let me go, turning to survey the room. The medical table was overturned. Instruments were scattered like confetti. The smell of copper blood and ozone hung heavy in the air. "Kale," Cyrus commanded, not even raising his voice. The elevator doors slid open instantly. Kale stepped out, looking from the wreckage to his king. His eyes widened when he saw Cyrus standing upright, the veins gone. "Sir?" Kale choked out. "Clean this up," Cyrus ordered. "Burn the bloodied towels, sterilize the floor, and order dinner, something with red meat, rare." "Yes, Alpha," Kale said, bowing his head. I could smell the relief coming off the driver. It smelled like wet dog and gratitude. "And kale?" Cyrus added, unbuttoning his ruined, blood-stained shirt. "Get Ms. St. Clair a room, the blue suite." My head snapped up. "Excuse me? I have an apartment. I have a cat shadow. I am going home." Cyrus stripped the shirt off completely, tossing it onto the pile of medical debris. His torso was pristine again, the muscles defined, the skin unblemished. He turned those golden eyes on me. "You aren't going anywhere, Remy," he said softly. "Nadia saw you. She saw you save me. You think she's going to let you walk back to that indefensible little shop?" "I have locks," I argued, though the excuse felt flimsy. "Nadia has a pack of 40 wolves who break bones for fun," Cyrus countered, walking toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. "You're staying here, tonight at least, until I can secure the perimeter." "This is kidnapping," I called after him. "Again!" "It's protective custody," he shouted back without turning around. "Go shower, you smell like a compost heap." I looked down at my clothes. I was covered in gray moss, purple sap, and sweat. I smelled like a swamp witch. "I hate him," I whispered to my satchel. Inside the bag, Echo poked a shadowy head out and shrugged. Chapter 14. The Lease Agreement. The blue suite was bigger than my entire apartment. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, a bed the size of a landing strip, and a bathroom that featured a tub carved from a single block of lapis lazuli. I showered, scrubbing the garden grime off my skin with soap that smelled like sandalwood and money. I didn't have fresh clothes, so I had to put my dirty jeans and cardigan back on. It felt gross, like putting a wet swimsuit back on. When I emerged, Cale was waiting in the hallway. "Dinner is served in the solar," he rumbled. The solar was a glass-walled dining room that felt like eating inside a cloud. Cyrus was already there, sitting at the head of a long table made of obsidian. He was wearing a fresh black t-shirt and sweatpants, the most casual I'd ever seen him. He looked younger, less like an ancient monument and more like a man. He was tearing into a steak that was barely cooked. "Sit," he said, pointing to the chair at his right hand. I sat. A plate of roasted chicken and vegetables was waiting for me. I realized with a jolt that I hadn't eaten since the bagel this morning. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The only sound was the clinking of silverware and the distant hum of the city below. "We need a contract," Cyrus said suddenly, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "I agree," I said, chewing a carrot. "I charge $500 an hour for specialized alchemy, plus hazard pay for the killer tree." "Not that kind of contract," he said. He leaned back, studying me. "Nadia knows I was weak. She left, but she didn't leave because she was scared. She left to gather intel. She's going to tell the council that the Night King is rotting." "But you're not," I pointed out. "Not anymore." "They won't believe me," Cyrus said, "unless I show them the source of the cure." He pointed a fork at me. "Me?" I squeaked. "You are the anchor," he explained. "My strength is tied to your proximity. If you leave, the cure degrades faster. If you stay, I remain at peak power. To keep the city from falling into a civil war, I need to present a united front." "United front," I repeated, the food turning to ash in my mouth. "You want me to be… what, your nurse?" "My mate," he corrected calmly. I choked on my water. I coughed for a solid minute while Cyrus watched, unbothered. "Fake mate," he clarified when I stopped wheezing. "We tell the council I found my true mate, that the bond healed the rot. It explains the sudden recovery and gives me a political excuse to keep a human constantly at my side." "I am not pretending to be your wife," I said, slamming my glass down. "I have a reputation, Cyrus. I'm a spooky spinster who yells at teenagers. I can't be a queen." "You already carry my scent," he said, his voice dropping. "You gave me your blood. To a wolf's nose, you are already claimed." "That was medical." "Intent doesn't matter to biology," he said. "Nadia smells it. Kale smells it. If you go back to the 9th Ward, you will be hunted. Not just by Nadia, but by every rival alpha who wants to use you to get to me. He stood up and walked over to my chair. He placed his hands on the arms of the chair, trapping me. "Stay here," he whispered. 6 months. I pay off your debts. I buy you whatever equipment you need. You live in luxury. And in return, you just exist near me. "And if I say no?" I whispered, looking up into those gold eyes. "Then I put a security detail on your shop so heavy you won't be able to see the sun," he said. "But you'll be safe." I looked at him. He was manipulating me. He was arrogant, domineering, and dangerous. But under the bravado, I saw the fear. He didn't want to go back to the noise. He didn't want the rot to come back. "I have a cat," I said weakly. "Well, a shadow cat." "Bring him," Cyrus said. "And I have a lot of weird jars." "We have storage." I sighed, defeated. "Fine, 6 months, but I want a separate bedroom, and you don't touch me unless it's a medical emergency." Cyrus smirked. It was a wicked, devastating thing. Deal. Chapter 15. The Eviction. Moving out of the 9th ward felt like tearing a limb off. We went back the next morning. Cyrus insisted on coming with me, claiming he needed to assess the security risk, but I knew he just wanted to make sure I didn't bolt. He looked ridiculous in my shop. He was too big, too expensive, too polished for the clutter of dried herbs and mismatched furniture. He stood by the door, looking at a jar of pickled anxiety with deep suspicion. "Why is it moving?" he asked. "Because anxiety never sits still," I muttered, shoving clothes into a duffel bag. Echo was having a meltdown. He was darting around the shop, detaching himself from the walls and hiding in the darkest corners. "Echo, get in the box," I coaxed, holding out a cardboard moving box. Echo formed a jagged, angry lightning bolt on the floor. "He doesn't like change," I explained to Cyrus. "He's a shadow," Cyrus said flatly. "He doesn't have a limbic system." "Don't listen to him, Echo," I cooed. "He's emotionally stunted." I packed the essentials first. My mother's grimoire, the rare ingredients I couldn't replace, dragon scale dust, siren's tears, the moonroot scraps. "We need to hurry," Cyrus said, checking his watch. "The moving crew will be here in 10 minutes to take the furniture." "I'm not taking the furniture," I said, looking around the tiny, cozy back room where I'd lived for 5 years. "It won't fit in your spaceship." "We can put it in storage," he suggested, softening slightly. He stepped closer, watching me wrap a porcelain teapot in newspaper. "Remy, it's temporary. You can come back." "Will I?" I asked, looking at him. 6 months living in the sky. I might not fit in here anymore when I come back." Cyrus reached out, his hand hovering over my shoulder, then dropped it. "You fit where you choose to fit." Suddenly, the front door rattled. Not a polite knock, a heavy, forceful thud. "Closed!" I yelled. "Ms. St. Clair?" a voice called out. It wasn't a customer. It was slick, oily, and smug. "This is the city health inspector. We have a report of hazardous materials." I froze. "Nadia," I whispered. "She moves fast," Cyrus murmured, his eyes darkening. "I don't have hazardous materials," I yelled back, "except for the man in the suit." "Open the door or we break it down." Cyrus moved. He didn't walk, he blurred. He was at the door in a heartbeat. He unlocked it and threw it open. A short, balding man in a cheap suit stood there, flanked by 2 police officers who looked suspiciously hairy, werewolves in uniform. The inspector opened his mouth to shout, saw Cyrus, and turned the color of old milk. "Mr. Kovac," the man stammered. We didn't know you were here." "Obviously," Cyrus said, his voice low and laced with a growl. "Since you are harassing my fiancé." The inspector choked. "Fiancé?" "Miss St. Clair is moving her residence to the spire," Cyrus said, leaning against the doorframe, projecting pure, terrifying alpha energy. "So this inspection is moot. Unless you want to inspect my penthouse? No, sir, no, mistake. Computer error. The man was backing away so fast he almost tripped over the curb. Have a good day, Mr. Kovac. They fled. Cyrus slammed the door and locked it. He turned to me, looking smug. See, he said, useful. You just announced it to the city, I groaned, dropping my head into my hands. Now I really can't leave. Pack the teapot, Cyrus said gently. We're going home. Chapter 16, The Roommate. The first night in the penthouse as a resident was weird. Cyrus had given me the blue suite, but I couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the silence was too loud, and the smell. Everything smelled like lemon cleaner and recycled air. I missed the smell of sage and old wood. I wandered out into the main living area around 2 a.m. The lights were dimmed. The city grid glowed below us like a circuit board. Cyrus was awake. He was sitting on the white sofa, staring out the window. He wasn't wearing a shirt. Again, did he own shirts? Just sweatpants. He held a glass of amber liquid in his hand. I hesitated, thinking about turning back, but he spoke without looking. Insomnia is a hard habit to break, he said. I walked over, hugging my arms around myself. I was wearing oversized flannel pajamas with cartoon ghosts on them, a stark contrast to his sleek, dangerous vibe. I thought the noise was gone, I said. It is, he said, turning to look at me. His eyes raked over my pajamas. A corner of his mouth twitched. Nice ghosts. They're spectral apparitions, I corrected, sitting on the far end of the sofa. Is the noise back? No, he said, taking a sip of his drink. It's quiet, but I've spent 10 years dreading sleep because the nightmares were so bad. Now that I can sleep, I'm afraid to close my eyes, in case I wake up and the silence is gone. It was a vulnerable admission. It made him seem human. It won't be gone, I said softly. I'm right down the hall. He looked at me. The intensity of his gaze pinned me to the cushions. You smell like cardboard and dust, he observed, from the packing. And you smell like expensive scotch and brooding, I retorted. He smiled. Come here. No. I just want to check the anchor, he said, strictly medical. I rolled my eyes, but I scooted closer. If you try anything, I have a vial of liquid itch in my pocket. Noted. He reached out and placed his hand on the back of my neck. His thumb brushed the pulse point under my jaw. His skin was warm, dry, and rough. He exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. His shoulders dropped 3 inches. Still silent, he whispered. Good, I whispered back, my heart hammering against my ribs. We sat like that for a long time, him touching my neck, anchoring himself to my pulse, me trying not to hyperventilate. It wasn't sexual, not exactly. It was intimate. It was survival. Eventually, the exhaustion overtook me. I leaned my head back against the sofa. The last thing I felt was him shifting closer, pulling a throw blanket over my legs. Sleep, Remy, he murmured. I'll keep watch. Chapter 17, The Invitation. The piece lasted exactly 36 hours. I was in the kitchen the next afternoon, trying to teach the penthouse's AI coffee maker how to brew something that didn't taste like battery acid, when Kale walked in. He looked grim. He was holding a thick black envelope embossed with silver leaf. Sir, Kale said, walking past me to where Cyrus was reading a tablet at the island. Courier just dropped this off. It's from the High Council. Cyrus didn't look up. Burn it. It's an invitation, Kale said, to the Solstice Gala, tonight. Cyrus froze. He set the tablet down slowly. The solstice isn't for 2 weeks. They moved it up, Kale said. Nadia petitioned for an emergency assembly. She's claiming the king is indisposed and the territory needs a steward. I stopped fighting the coffee machine. She's calling your bluff. Cyrus took the envelope. He ripped it open. He scanned the card, his jaw tightening until a muscle feathered in his cheek. "She's forcing a public appearance," Cyrus said, his voice cold. "If I don't show up tonight, it's an admission of weakness. If I do show up, she'll be waiting to test me." He looked at me. "You have to come," he said. "To a werewolf gala?" I laughed nervously. "I'd rather eat glass. I'm human, Cyrus. I'll be an appetizer." "You'll be the queen," he said, sliding off the stool. He walked over to me, looming in that way that was starting to feel less like a threat and more like a promise. "We have to sell the true mate story, tonight, in front of the entire council." "I don't have a dress," I said, grasping for straws. "I have jeans and ghost pajamas." "I have a stylist arriving in 20 minutes, Cyrus said. He reached out and brushed a smudge of coffee grounds off my cheek. "Wear something red. It signals aggression." "I don't want to signal aggression," I yelled as he walked away. "I want to signal, please don't eat me." "Same thing," he called back. "Be ready at 7. I looked at Echo, who was currently disguised as the shadow of the toaster. "We are going into the lion's den," I told him. "If anyone asks, you're a fashion accessory. A very dark, brooding scarf." Echo gave me a thumbs up. I groaned. The domestic bliss was over. The politics were beginning. And I had a feeling Nadia Volkov wasn't going to be impressed by my ghost pajamas. Chapter 18. The War Paint. The stylist Cyrus had hired was a woman named Marceline, who had the bedside manner of a sniper. She didn't ask me what I wanted to look like. She measured me with a laser tape, muttered something about fixing the posture, and then unleashed her team. For 2 hours, I was plucked, polished, and painted. My hair, usually a riot of frizzy curls that defied gravity and logic, was wrestled into sleek, glossy waves that cascaded over one shoulder. My face was contoured until I had cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. "Open!" Marceline commanded, coming at me with a lipstick tube that looked like a bullet casing. "I usually stick to chapstick," I mumbled. "Tonight you are standing next to a primordial," she said, applying the color with surgical precision. "If you look like chapstick, the wolves will eat you. You need to look like blood." She was right. When she finally spun the chair around to face the mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. The dress was a masterpiece of aggression. It was a deep, violent crimson, the color of oxygenated blood. It was silk, strapless, and fitted so tightly to my torso it felt like armor. The skirt flared out at the hips, with a slit that went dangerously high up my left thigh. "It's a lot," I whispered. "It's a statement," Marceline corrected. "It says, 'I am dangerous.' Now, where is the accessory?" "Here," I said, pointing to the velvet box on the table. I opened it. Echo was inside, currently shaped like a shadowy, amorphous blob. "Echo," I hissed. "Scarf mode, now!" Echo grumbled, a vibration in the air, but complied. He elongated, thinning out until he looked like a sheer, translucent shawl made of dark smoke. I draped him over my shoulders. He shivered, settling against my skin like cool silk. To the naked eye, he just looked like expensive gossamer fabric that moved slightly in a non-existent breeze. "Chic," Marceline noted, unaware she was complimenting a sentient shadow. "Go, he is waiting." I walked out of the suite and toward the elevator. My heels clicked on the marble, a rhythmic countdown to my execution. Cyrus was waiting in the foyer. He was turned away from me, adjusting his cufflinks. He was wearing a tuxedo, but on him, it didn't look like formal wear. It looked like a containment suit. The black fabric strained across his shoulders. He radiated a heat so intense I could feel it from 10 feet away. "Ready?" he asked, turning around. The word died in his throat. He froze. His golden eyes swept over me, starting at the hem of the red dress and traveling slowly, deliberately, up to my face. He didn't blink. The silence stretched thin, vibrating with tension. "Well?" I asked, fighting the urge to fidget. "Do I look aggressive enough?" Cyrus took a slow step toward me. He looked like a man who had been starving for a decade and had just been presented with a feast. "You look," he said, his voice dropping to that deep, tectonic rumble, "like a heart attack." He stopped in front of me, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His fingers brushed the smoke of Echo's form on my shoulder. "Is the shadow behaving?" "He's terrified of your shoes," I said. "He thinks you're going to stomp on him." "Smart shadow," Cyrus murmured. He offered me his arm. "Let's go, Remy. The wolves are hungry, and I intend to show them that I am the one with the teeth." Chapter 19. The Shark Tank. The Solstice Gala was held in the grand ballroom on the 50th floor of the spire. As the elevator doors opened, the sound hit me first, a low, buzzing roar of conversation, clinking glass, and string music. Then the smell hit me. It was overwhelming. Hundreds of wolves in one room. The scent profile was chaotic. Wet dog, musk, expensive cologne, champagne, and underneath it all, the sharp, metallic tang of dominance. It tasted like copper in the back of my throat. "Breathe," Cyrus whispered against my ear. "Focus on me. Focus on the anchor." I inhaled. He smelled like ozone and rain. It cut through the musk like a knife. I leaned into him slightly, my hand gripping his forearm tight enough to bruise. "Announcing," the doorman bellowed, his voice booming over the crowd, "the Primordial Alpha of Chicago, Cyrus Kovac, and his guest, Ms. Remy St. Clair." The room went silent. It wasn't a polite silence. It was a predatory stillness. 300 heads turned in unison. Cyrus didn't hesitate. He walked us into the room with a stride that owned the floor. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked straight ahead, his chin lifted, radiating pure, unadulterated power. I felt the waves of judgment crashing against me. I could smell their confusion. Human? Weak prey. But then I smelled their fear. Because Cyrus wasn't hiding his aura tonight, he was projecting it. He felt like a thunderstorm trapped in a jar. "Don't look down," he murmured. "Look bored. You're a queen, remember?" "I'm a potion maker in a dress I can't breathe in," I hissed back, smiling brilliantly at a woman who looked like she wanted to eat my liver. We moved through the crowd. The crowd parted. It was like Moses and the Red Sea, if the sea was made of billionaires in designer gowns. "Cyrus," a deep voice rumbled. We stopped. A man blocked our path. He was huge, with scars running down his neck and a scent that reeked of jealousy, sour milk. "Marcus," Cyrus greeted, his tone icy. "You're blocking my light." "We heard you were sick," Marcus sneered, his eyes flicking to the veins on Cyrus's neck, which were currently invisible. "We heard the rot had finally taken the Night King." "Do I look sick to you, Marcus?" Cyrus asked softly. He took a half-step forward. The shadows under Marcus's feet suddenly stretched, grasping at his ankles. It was subtle, only I noticed it, but Marcus paled. "No," Marcus stammered, stepping back. "You look healthy." "I am better than healthy," Cyrus said, pulling me closer to his side. "I am mated." A ripple of shock went through the nearby listeners. Mated. The word carried weight. "To a human?" Marcus laughed, though it sounded nervous. "She smells like herbs and fear." "She smells like me," Cyrus corrected. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to my temple. It was a performance, but his lips were scorching hot against my skin. "And if you speak to her with that tone again, Marcus, I will remove your tongue." Marcus snapped his mouth shut. He bowed stiffly and retreated. "Nice," I whispered. "Very diplomatic." "Diplomacy is for humans," Cyrus said, scanning the room. "Wolves only respect force. And speaking of force..." He stiffened. I followed his gaze. Across the ballroom, standing by a fountain of champagne, was Nadia Volkov. She was wearing silver, looking like a knife blade wrapped in silk. She was staring right at us. And she didn't look scared. She looked hungry. Chapter 20. The Waltz of Lies. "Dance with me," Cyrus said abruptly. "What?" I panicked. "No, I don't dance. I sway awkwardly while holding a drink." "Nadia is coming over," Cyrus muttered. "We need to be occupied, and we need to look like we are so obsessed with each other that the rest of the world doesn't exist." He didn't wait for consent. He swept me onto the dance floor. The orchestra was playing a waltz, something haunting and minor key. Cyrus pulled me into a frame. His hand was large and warm on the small of my back, right against the red silk. His other hand clasped mine, interlacing our fingers. "Follow my lead," he instructed. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. We moved, and surprisingly, I didn't trip. Cyrus moved with a fluid, predatory grace that made it easy to follow him. He steered me effortlessly, spinning me through the sea of other couples. "You're burning up," I whispered, looking up at him. Up close, the fever was obvious. His skin was flushed, his pupils were blown wide. The potion I'd brewed was a stimulant, but on a primordial physiology, it was running hot. "The energy," he rasped, his voice tight. "It needs an outlet. Being close to you, it helps." "Does it?" I asked. "Because you look like you want to bite something." "I do," he admitted, his gaze dropping to my mouth. The hunger in his eyes wasn't acting. "I want to bite you." My breath hitched. My synesthesia flared. The scent of lust coming off him was so strong it tasted like burnt sugar and dark chocolate. "Stick to the script, Wolf," I warned, though my voice lacked conviction. "This is the script," he murmured, spinning me again. The room blurred into streaks of gold and light. "The story is that we are true mates, that the bond hit us like lightning, that I am so consumed by you I can't think straight." He pulled me closer until there was no air between us. My chest pressed against his. I could feel the hammering of his heart, thud, 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 thud. "It's a good story," I breathed. "Is it a story?" he asked softly. He lowered his head. His forehead rested against mine. We stopped dancing, just swaying in place in the center of the floor. The rest of the room faded away. For a second, it was just the heat of him, the smell of rain, and the terrified pounding of my own heart. "Cyrus," I whispered, "people are staring." "Let them stare," he growled. "Let them see what belongs to me." "Ahem!" The moment shattered. We stopped swaying. Cyrus lifted his head, his expression instantly hardening into a mask of cold fury. Nadia stood next to us on the dance floor. She held a glass of champagne, but she gripped the stem like she wanted to snap it. "Touching," she drawled. "Really, I haven't seen a performance this convincing since Broadway." Cyrus didn't let me go. He kept his arm around my waist, turning us to face her. "Nadia," he said, "I see you didn't choke on your ambition yet." "I see you found a concealer for the necrosis," she countered, her eyes scanning his face. "You look well, Cyrus. Surprisingly well for a man who was dying on a table yesterday." "Love heals all wounds," I said, channeling my inner soap opera star. I batted my eyelashes. Nadia looked at me like I was a cockroach on a wedding cake. "Does it?" she asked. "Or does alchemy heal wounds? I smell the moonroot on you, human. It's faint, but it's there." My stomach dropped. She had a nose like a bloodhound. "I use herbal shampoo," I lied smoothly. Nadia stepped closer. The crowd around us had stopped dancing. They were watching. The sharks were circling. "I don't think so," Nadia said. "I think this is a trick. I think the Night King is weak and he hired a witch to prop him up." She smiled, sharp and cruel. "So, let's test the bond, shall we?" Chapter 21. The Sniff Test. The music died. The chatter stopped. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. "A test?" Cyrus asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You want to challenge me here, Nadia? In front of the council?" "Not a combat challenge," Nadia said, waving a hand dismissively. "That would be unfair, given your condition. No, I invoke the Veraritoss olfactus. A gasp went through the room. What's that? I whispered to Cyrus, clutching his bicep. The scent of truth, he murmured, his jaw rigid. It's an old pack law. If a mating is questioned, the alpha must prove the bond is biological, not political. How? By letting the challenger inspect the mark. I froze. The mark? You mean the bite mark? You didn't bite me. I know, he hissed. Nadia stepped closer, her amber eyes gleaming with triumph. If she is your true mate, Cyrus, you would have marked her. The instinct is impossible to resist for a primordial. Show us the mark. She reached out, intending to pull the strap of my dress down to check my neck. Cyrus moved. He caught her wrist in midair. The sound of his grip tightening was audible, leather gloves creaking under pressure. Do not touch her, he snarled. The shadows in the room elongated, turning into spikes. If you have nothing to hide, Nadia taunted, wincing slightly but holding her ground. Why are you afraid? Show us the bite. If it's there, I will kneel. If it's not, then you are a liar, a fraud, and you forfeit the spire. She looked at the crowd. A king who lies to his pack is no king at all. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. The tide was turning. They wanted proof. I looked at Cyrus. He was trapped. If he refused, he looked weak. If he agreed, they would see my unblemished neck, and the game was over. The rot would be exposed. He would die. I couldn't let that happen. He didn't mark me, I said clearly. The room gasped again. Nadia's smile widened. Aha! She shouted. I knew it! A fraud! He didn't mark me, I continued, stepping out of Cyrus's hold and walking toward Nadia. Because I wouldn't let him. Nadia blinked. Excuse me? I laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. You wolves are all the same. Bite first, ask questions later. But I'm human, Nadia, and I told Cyrus that if he came near my neck with those teeth before a ring was on my finger, I'd file a restraining order. I stopped right in front of her. I was shorter than her, but in my heels and red dress, I felt 10 feet tall. He's a primordial, Nadia scoffed. He doesn't take orders from a human. Oh, honey, I said, leaning in. He takes orders from me every day. He's begging to mark me. I'm making him wait. It's called tantric courtship. Look it up. I turned to Cyrus, flashing him a wicked grin. Tell her, darling. Tell her how frustrated you are. Cyrus stared at me for a split second, stunned. Then the corner of his mouth quirked up. He understood the play. She's right, Cyrus rumbled, stepping up behind me. He wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face in the crook of my neck, right where the mark should be. He inhaled deeply, growling loud enough for the room to hear. She is difficult. She denies me daily. It is maddening. He looked up at Nadia, his gold eyes blazing. But I wait, because she is my queen, and a king does not force his queen. The crowd murmured again, but this time the tone was different. It wasn't suspicion, it was respect. A primordial alpha showing restraint, that was power. Nadia's face fell. Her trap had backfired. This is ridiculous, she spat. You expect us to believe. I expect you to back off. I cut her off. I took a step closer to her. And then I let my secret weapon loose. Echo, I whispered. Showtime. On my shoulder, the sheer black shawl rippled. A tendril of shadow detached itself and slithered down my arm. It reached out and flicked the bottom of Nadia's champagne glass. It was invisible to everyone else, but the result wasn't. The glass tipped. The champagne spilled all down the front of her silver dress. Nadia shrieked, jumping back. The wet silk clung to her, ruining the sleek lines of her gown. She looked like a drowned rat. Oh no, I deadpanned. You're making a mess. You should really work on your coordination. The crowd tittered. Laughter rippled through the ballroom. The tension broke. Nadia wasn't a threat anymore. She was a punchline. Chapter 22. The Shadow King. Nadia looked down at her stained dress, then up at me, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. Her eyes shifted from amber to wolf yellow, her canines lengthened. "You little witch," she snarled. She lunged. It happened fast. Nadia didn't shift fully, but she moved with wolf speed, her claws extending, aiming for my face. I didn't have time to scream, but Cyrus did. "Enough!" The roar didn't just vibrate the room, it shattered the windows. The glass panes overlooking the city exploded outward in a shower of diamonds. The wind from 50 stories up howled into the ballroom. Cyrus moved in front of me, but he didn't just block her. He erupted. The shadows in the ballroom, every single one of them, detached from the floor. They shot upward, forming a cage of black spears around Nadia. She froze, a shadow spike hovering an inch from her throat. Cyrus stood there, his hand raised. The illusion of the healthy human man cracked. He looked like the Night King. His skin was glowing faintly. Darkness poured off him like smoke. "You dare?" Cyrus's voice was a booming distortion, layered with the sound of grinding stone. "You dare attack my mate in my own house?" Nadia was trembling. She looked at the shadow spike at her jugular. She looked at Cyrus, whose power was filling the room, sucking the light out of the chandeliers. I didn't," she stammered. "Kneel," Cyrus commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an alpha command pushed through primordial magic. Every wolf in the room dropped to their knees. The sheer weight of his dominance crushed them. Even Nadia collapsed, her forehead hitting the floor. Only I remained standing. I stood behind him, shielded by his body, untouched by the crushing gravity of his power. Cyrus glared down at the prostrate crowd. He was breathing hard. I could see a flicker of black vein returning to his neck. He was using too much power. The potion was burning off too fast. I had to stop him before he collapsed. I reached out and placed my hand on the center of his back, right between his shoulder blades. "Cyrus," I whispered, "they're down. You won." He flinched at my touch. The shadows wavered. The oppressive weight lifted slightly. "Let's go," I murmured. "Take me home. I'm tired of this party." He turned his head. His eyes were pitch black, no gold left. He looked at me, struggling to recognize me through the haze of his own rage. "Remy," he rasped. "Yeah, it's me," I said, grabbing his hand. "Come on, Shadow King, let's make an exit." He nodded, a jerky motion. He swept his hand and the shadow cage dissolved. "Get out," he told the room. We didn't wait to see if they obeyed. We walked to the elevator, leaving a room full of kneeling wolves and shattered glass behind us. As the doors closed, Cyrus leaned against the wall and slid down to the floor. The black veins were back, racing up his neck. "That," he wheezed, closing his eyes, "was too close." "You were a drama queen," I said, sitting down next to him and taking his hand to anchor him. But the window thing was a nice touch. Chapter 23. The Deficit. The elevator ride down to the gala had felt like a descent into a shark tank. The ride back up felt like a funeral procession. Cyrus was leaning his entire weight against the back wall of the mirrored box. His eyes were closed, his head tipped back. The glorious, terrifying golden light that had filled the ballroom was gone. In its place, the gray pallor of the rot was reclaiming his skin with frightening speed. It was like watching a time-lapse video of a flower wilting, but reversed. "Kale," I said, my voice sharp to cut through the panic rising in my throat. "Get the medical kit, the big one." "Already prepped, Ms. St. Clair," Kale rumbled from the front. The doors slid open. We didn't walk out, we spilled out. Cyrus took one step, his knee buckled, and he went down. He didn't hit the floor hard. Kale caught him, but the sight of the Primordial Alpha collapsing was enough to make my stomach turn over. "Get him to the sofa," I ordered, kicking off my heels. "The medical table is too cold." Kale hoisted Cyrus effortlessly, carrying him to the white sectional like he was a child. He laid him down. Cyrus groaned, a sound that was less alpha growl and more wounded animal. I dropped to my knees beside him. The red silk of my dress pooled on the black marble, looking like a crime scene. "Echo, get off," I muttered. The sheer black shawl on my shoulders shivered, then detached, sliding onto the floor to form a puddle of anxious darkness. I placed my hands on Cyrus's chest. The heat was gone. He was freezing again. "Open your eyes, Cyrus," I commanded. "Don't you dare check out on me. I just lied to 300 people for you." His lashes fluttered. A sliver of dull gold showed through. "Remy." "I'm here." I ripped his bow tie off and unbuttoned his collar. The black veins were racing up his throat, pulsing with an angry, necrotic rhythm. "You idiot! You absolute majestic idiot! Why did you use the command?" "Had to," he wheezed. "She threatened you." "She threatened to splash me with wine," I argued, checking his pulse. It was thready and erratic. "I can handle Chardonnay, Cyrus. I can't handle you dying." I looked up at Kale, who was hovering with a tray of syringes and gauze. "The moonroot. Do we have any left?" Kale shook his head grimly. "You used the last of the scraps for the first dose. The rest is in the conservatory." "We can't go back to the conservatory tonight," I said, biting my lip. "He's too weak to survive the plants, and I can't carry him." I looked back at Cyrus. He was shivering violently. The rot was punishing him for the surge of energy he'd borrowed. It was eating the deficit. "He needs an anchor," I whispered. "A strong one." I grabbed a scalpel from the tray. "Ms. St. Clair," Kale warned. "I'm not cutting him," I said. "I'm cutting me." I ripped the bandage off my left hand, the one I'd cut for the ritual days ago. The wound was angry and half-healed. I didn't hesitate. I pressed the fresh scalpel into the existing slice, reopening it. It stung, sharp and hot, fresh blood welling up instantly. I made a fist, letting it pool, then I pressed my bleeding hand directly over the knot of veins on his chest. Skin to skin, blood to blood. "Breathe it in, Wolf," I commanded, leaning down until my forehead rested against his. "Take it." Cyrus inhaled sharply. His body arched off the cushions. The scent of my blood, fresh, metallic, and laced with the magic of the scent witch, hit him like a defibrillator. He groaned, his hands coming up to grip my waist. His fingers dug into the silk of my dress. "Mine," he growled. It wasn't a conscious word, it was the instinct talking. Yeah, I'm yours," I soothed, stroking his hair with my clean hand. "Just keep breathing. Don't let the noise win." We stayed like that for hours, me bleeding onto his expensive shirt, him clinging to me like a drowning man to a raft, while the shadows of the penthouse slowly lengthened into the deep night. Chapter 24. The Hangover. I woke up with a crick in my neck and a mouth that tasted like old lipstick. I was still on the sofa. Somewhere in the night, we had shifted. I was lying on my side, curled into the curve of Cyrus's body. His arm was thrown over me, heavy and possessive, pinning me to the cushions. I froze. Memory rushed back. The gala, the window smashing, the collapse. I tilted my head back carefully. Cyrus was asleep. Actual sleep. His breathing was deep and rhythmic. The black veins on his neck had receded, not completely gone, but faint, like old bruises. I tried to slide out from under his arm. His grip tightened instantly. "Don't," he mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. "I need to pee," I whispered, "and I'm wearing a corset that is actively rearranging my internal organs." One golden eye cracked open. It was clear, exhausted but clear. "You stayed," he said. "You were holding me hostage," I pointed out. "Physically." He released me slowly, flexing his fingers. He looked at his hand, then at my chest where the red dress was rumpled and stained with a small smear of dried blood. He sat up, wincing. "Did I hurt you?" "Self-inflicted," I said, holding up my bandaged hand. I had to hotwire your heart. You burned through the moonroot in about 4 hours, Cyrus. That was a 6-month supply. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the gala style. I lost control. When she shifted, when she aimed for you, the beast took over. Well, the beast has expensive taste in window repair, I said, standing up and stretching. My spine cracked audibly. Do you remember what you said? To the council? Cyrus rubbed his face. I said a lot of things. Most of them involved threatening to execute people. You called me your queen, I said softly. He stopped rubbing his face. He looked up at me. The morning sun was streaming through the broken windows, which Kale had boarded up with plywood overnight, casting slats of light across his face. I remember, he said, and you told them we were tantric, I added, feeling a blush creep up my neck. A slow, wicked grin spread across his face. I remember that too. Maddening, I believe I called it. It was a good lie, I said quickly, turning away to find my shoes. Was it? Cyrus asked. I felt him stand up behind me. The air pressure in the room shifted. He moved closer, his bare feet silent on the marble. You gave me your blood again, Remy, he murmured, close enough that his breath stirred the hair on my neck. You anchored me all night. You smell like me now, fully. Occupational hazard, I said, clutching my heels to my chest like a shield. Is it? He reached out and traced the line of my shoulder, right where the strap of the red dress dug in. We told the city we are mated, he whispered. We told them I am waiting to mark you. How long do you think we can fake that kind of hunger, Remy? I turned around. He was right there. The bond, or whatever this chemical reaction was between us, was pulling at my chest like a magnet. I wanted to lean into him. I wanted to let him finish what he started on the dance floor. 6 months, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's the contract. Cyrus stared at my mouth. I think, he said hoarsely, that we are going to breach that contract. Sir, Kale's voice boomed from the elevator. We jumped apart like teenagers caught making out in a basement. Kale walked in, holding a tablet and looking decidedly uncomfortable. Apologies, but we have a problem. The council is demanding a press conference. They want to see the happy couple in daylight. Cyrus sighed, the predator receding, the king returning. Of course they do. Chapter 25, The Fortress. The rest of Sunday was spent turning the penthouse into a fortress. Since the windows were shattered, the temperature in the apartment had dropped to match the chilly Chicago autumn. Kale had a team of contractors, all wolves, all silent, installing reinforced steel shutters over the glass. It made the place feel less like a home and more like a bunker. I had changed out of the red dress and into one of Cyrus's shirts and a pair of sweatpants Kale had fetched from my boxes. I looked like I was drowning in black cotton. Coffee, Cyrus said, placing a mug in front of me. I was sitting at the kitchen island, staring at my mother's grimoire, trying to find a substitute for moonroot. Thanks, I muttered. I took a sip. It was perfect. You learned how to use the machine. I have a PhD in engineering, he said, leaning against the counter. I figured I could conquer an espresso. You have a PhD? I looked at him. He was wearing a fresh Henley shirt that clung to his arms. He looked domestic. It was unnerving. I've been alive for 600 years, Remy. I have 7 degrees. I get bored. What's your thesis on? The structural integrity of Gothic cathedrals, he said, and the socio-economic impact of the plague. Light reading, I snorted. What are you looking for? He gestured to the book. A plan B, I admitted. The moonroot is too volatile. If you use magic, it burns off. I need a stabilizer, something that can handle the output of a primordial without turning you into a ticking time bomb. There isn't one, Cyrus said. That's why I was dying. The human soul, or the wolf soul, isn't meant to hold this much shadow. You're not just shadow, I said, tapping the page. You're Earth. You're biology. We just need to ground you. Echo, who had spent the day hiding in the toaster again, slid across the counter. He poked Cyrus's hand with a shadowy finger. Cyrus didn't flinch. He looked down at the shadow. Hello, Smudge. Echo bristled, forming sharp spikes, then relaxed and wrapped around Cyrus's wrist like a bracelet. He likes you, I noted, surprised. He usually hates alphas. He says they smell like wet dog. I smell like wet dog, Cyrus corrected, but I also smell like you. That's why he likes me. He lifted his hand, looking at the shadow bracelet. You realize what this means? If your familiar accepts me, the magic accepts me. He's not a familiar, I said automatically. He's a parasite with personality. He's a piece of the void, Cyrus said softly, just like me. He looked at me then. The domestic calm shattered. The air grew heavy again. Nadia isn't going to stop, he said. She was humiliated. She'll go to the only person powerful enough to challenge me. The Sun Eater? I asked. The name from the Bible made me shiver. Magnus, Cyrus nodded. He's been exiled to the West Coast for 50 years. But if he hears I'm weak, if he hears the Night King is relying on a human witch, then we better figure out this potion, I said, closing the book with a snap. Because I am not letting a guy named Magnus ruin my reputation as the best alchemist in Chicago. Cyrus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'll double the security detail. Cyrus, I said, reaching out to cover his hand. We'll fix it. He turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with mine. His skin was warm. I believe you. Chapter 26, The Beacon. The attack didn't come with an explosion, it came with a phone call. It was 3 a.m. The penthouse was dark, save for the glow of the city through the cracks in the steel shutters. I was asleep in the guest room. I had insisted on a separate room, despite Cyrus's logic about body heat. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I groaned, rolling over. Unknown number. I answered it, expecting a telemarketer or a wrong number. Hello? Ms. St. Clair? The voice was smooth, warm, and sounded like it was smiling. It smelled, through the phone somehow, of oranges and gasoline. Who is this? I sat up, clutching the duvet. My name is Magnus, the voice said. I believe you have something of mine. My blood turned to ice. I don't know you. Oh, but you do, Magnus purred. You have the Night King, and you have my attention. I hear you put on quite a show at the gala. Tantric courtship. Charming. What do you want? I hissed. I want to negotiate, Magnus said. Cyrus is dying, we both know it. The moonroot is a bandage on a bullet hole. I have the cure. There is no cure, I said. He told me. He lied, Magnus said. Or maybe he just forgot. Memory gets foggy after 6 centuries. Meet me, Remy. Just you. I can save him. Or I can burn that metal box you're living in to the ground. I'm not an idiot, I said. I'm not meeting you. Check your window, Magnus said. The line went dead. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. The steel shutters were closed, but there was a small gap at the bottom. I looked down. On the street, 50 stories below, something was burning. It wasn't a random fire. The flames were bright, blinding white. They were arranged in a shape, a massive, fiery symbol scorched into the asphalt of the intersection. A sun. And inside the sun, written in fire, I see you. My door burst open. Cyrus stood there, shirtless, his eyes wide and black. He smelled of pure panic. Remy, he shouted, get back from the window. He's here, I whispered, pointing at the fire below. The Sun Eater. He's here. Cyrus crossed the room in 2 strides. He grabbed me, pulling me away from the wall, shielding my body with his. Kale, he roared, his voice shaking the foundations of the room. Code Red! We are under siege! I looked up at Cyrus. The fever was back. The fear was back. "He called me," I whispered. "He said he has a cure." Cyrus looked down at me. His expression was terrifying. "He doesn't have a cure, Remy," Cyrus growled. "He wants to eat the shadows. And to do that, he needs to break the anchor." He pulled me tighter. "He's coming for you." Chapter 27. The Furnace. The penthouse, usually a fortress of cold steel and silence, was beginning to feel like a kiln. Kale had engaged the emergency blast shields. Thick, reinforced titanium plates had slid over every window, sealing us inside a metal box. The lights were cut to conserve power, leaving us bathed in the red glow of the emergency track lighting. "Status!" Cyrus barked. He was pacing the length of the living room, a predator in a cage. He was shirtless again, his skin slick with sweat, not from fever this time, but from the ambient temperature. "Perimeter breached at the lobby level," Kale reported, tapping furiously at a tactical tablet. "The fire suppression system is offline. Magnus has burned through the water mains." "He's not trying to enter," Cyrus growled, running a hand through his damp hair. "He's trying to cook us." I sat at the kitchen island, my bandaged hand resting on my mother's grimoire. The air conditioning had died 10 minutes ago. The air was already heavy, thick, and smelling faintly of scorched metal. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice rasping in the dry heat. "You called him the Sun Eater. That sounds bad." Cyrus stopped pacing. He turned to me, his golden eyes glowing in the gloom. "Magnus is an elemental warlock," Cyrus explained, walking over to lean against the counter. "A century ago, he tried to drain the sun to fuel an immortality spell. I stopped him. I exiled him to the West Coast. I thought he would die of old age." "Apparently, hate is a good preservative," I muttered, wiping sweat from my forehead. "He controls light and heat," Cyrus continued, "and I am a creature of shadow and cold. We are natural opposites. But in his current state, if he has consumed enough power, he can incinerate this entire building just by standing near it." "He wants the anchor," I said quietly. Cyrus stiffened. "He won't touch you." "He called me, Cyrus. He knows I'm the only thing keeping the rot in check. If he kills me, the rot consumes you, and he walks in and takes the city without throwing a punch." "I said," Cyrus's voice dropped to a terrifying sub-bass rumble, "he won't touch you. Kale, prep the panic room. It has an independent oxygen supply." "I'm not going into the panic room," I said, standing up. "Remy, this isn't a debate." "You're right, it's not." I walked over to him, ignoring the heat radiating off his skin. "If I go into that box, I can't help you. I can't anchor you through 3 feet of lead. And right now, you need every ounce of stability you can get." "I need you safe," he roared. The shadows in the room spiked, lashing out like whips. "I need you alive," I shouted back, "and you don't survive this without me." We stared at each other, chest to chest, breathing hard. The heat in the room was climbing. My clothes were sticking to my skin. "He's heating the superstructure," Kale interrupted, his voice calm despite the fact that we were being slow roasted. "Internal temperature is 95 degrees and rising. Structural integrity of the steel beams will be compromised in 1 hour." Cyrus closed his eyes. He rested his forehead against mine. His skin was burning hot, but it felt grounding. "I can't beat him like this," Cyrus whispered. "The rot is waiting for me to use magic. If I shift, if I let the beast out to fight him, I might not come back." "Then don't come back alone," I whispered. "Take me with you." "To the void?" He pulled back, looking at me with horror. "No!" "To the fight," I corrected. "We don't hide in the box, Cyrus. We go on the offensive. Magnus expects us to cower until we melt. Let's disappoint him." Chapter 28. The Temptation. By the time the internal temperature hit 105 degrees, the penthouse was a sauna. The air was hazy, breathing hurt. My bandaged hand throbbed in time with my pulse. Echo had retreated into my pocket, refusing to come out into the light/heat. Buzz! My phone, sitting on the counter, lit up. Unknown number. Cyrus looked at it like it was a bomb. Don't answer it. I picked it up. Speaker, I said. I tapped the screen. Is it getting warm in there, Ms. St. Clair? Magnus's voice was cheerful. I imagine the Night King is suffering. Shadows don't do well in the light. We're cozy, I lied, my throat dry as sandpaper. We're roasting marshmallows. Brave, Magnus purred, but stupid. Look at him, Remy. Look at your king. I looked at Cyrus. He was on one knee, clutching the edge of the sofa. The heat was sapping his strength faster than the rot ever did. His skin was graying again. The black veins were creeping up his neck, feasting on his weakness. He is dying, Magnus said, and you are dragging out his suffering. I have the cure, Remy. I have the sunstone. One touch, and the rot is burned out forever. And what's the price? I asked, my grip on the phone tightening. You, Magnus said simply. Walk out onto the balcony. I'll send a lift. Bring me the king's ring and I will heal him. Then you and we can discuss your potential. A scent witch of your caliber is wasted on a wolf. Cyrus snarled, a wet, weak sound. Don't. Listen. If you stay, he burns, Magnus said. If you come to me, he lives. He loses his city, yes, but he lives. Isn't that what you want? To save him? The line went dead. I stared at the phone. It was a good offer. A logical offer. Cyrus lived. I survived. We just lost the war. I looked at Cyrus. He was struggling to stand, his legs shaking. He looked at me with absolute devastation. He thought I was considering it. He thought I was going to leave. Remy, he rasped. Don't. I walked over to the kitchen island. I grabbed a knife. Cyrus flinched. I turned to Kale. Do we have any liquid nitrogen in the medical supplies? Kale blinked, sweat dripping off his nose. Yes, for cryo storage. Get it, I ordered, and get me the rest of the peppermint oil and the cayenne pepper. What are you doing? Cyrus asked, bracing himself against the wall. I'm brewing a counterattack, I said, slamming the knife into a lemon, the only fruit left in the bowl. Magnus made a mistake. He thinks I'm just a love-struck girl who wants to save her boyfriend. I looked up, meeting Cyrus's gaze. He forgot that I'm a businesswoman, and nobody hostile takeovers my investment. I poured the ingredients into a metal shaker. Magnus is fire, I said, my brain racing through the alchemy charts in my head. Fire creates heat. Liquid nitrogen creates absolute zero. We need to cool him down before he melts the building. How do we get it to him? Cyrus asked. He's hovering outside. We're going to the conservatory, I said. It's the only room with a glass ceiling. We lure him in, we let him break the glass, and then we hit him with the nitrogen. The conservatory is glass, Cyrus argued. He'll see us instantly. Exactly, I said, corking the shaker. I reached into my pocket, grabbed a trembling Echo, and shoved him into the padded satchel. Then I grabbed the nitrogen-heavy, pressurized medical cylinders. I shoved 2 into the bag, but it was too full. Echo, I commanded, make room! Shadows swirled inside the satchel, expanding the space. I shoved the remaining 2 cylinders into the magical void of the bag. It was heavy enough to bruise my shoulder, but it held. Sorry, buddy, I whispered to the bag. You're the delivery system. I zipped the heavy bag and slung it over my shoulder. We want him to see us. We want him to come inside. Chapter 29. The Last Elevator Ride. The elevator ride up to the conservatory was the longest minute of my life. The heat was even worse here. The metal walls were hot to the touch. Cyrus was leaning heavily on me, his arm draped over my shoulders. I could feel the heat radiating off him, not fever now, but the desperate, burning energy of a body fighting to stay alive. If this doesn't work, Cyrus whispered, his lips brushing my ear, I need you to run. If this doesn't work, I said, adjusting the strap of the bag containing my improvised nitrogen bombs. We're both toast. Literally. The elevator dinged. Wait, Cyrus said. He pulled me back. He turned me to face him. He looked terrible, sweaty, pale, veined, but his eyes were clear. You never answered the question, he said. What question? In the ballroom, before Nadia interrupted. He reached up, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped my face. Is it just a story? The bond? My heart hammered against my ribs. We were about to walk into a greenhouse to fight a sun wizard. This was possibly the worst time for a relationship talk. It was also the only time. No, I whispered. It's not a story. Cyrus exhaled, a sound of pure relief. He lowered his forehead to mine. Then let me mark you, he breathed. Right now. If I die up there, I want to die knowing you are mine. You're not going to die, I said fiercely. I grabbed his lapels and pulled him down. And you're not marking me in an elevator, Cyrus Kovac. You owe me a ring first, and a date that doesn't involve arson. I kissed him. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was a promise. It tasted of salt and fear and desperate hope. Hold that thought, I whispered against his mouth. The doors slid open. The conservatory was an inferno. The glass walls were glowing orange from the outside. Magnus was hovering, actually hovering outside the spire, support by a pillar of fire. He was blasting the glass with waves of heat. Inside, the jungle was dying. The massive vines were withering, turning brown. The air was thick with smoke. He's here, Cyrus growled. The beast surfaced in his eyes, turning the gold to black. Magnus saw us. Through the glass, his face twisted into a smile. He raised a hand. A ball of white-hot plasma formed in his palm. He threw it. The glass ceiling shattered. Thousands of shards rained down like glittering knives. The fireball slammed into the center of the atrium, igniting the withered trees. Now! I screamed. Echo! I threw the bag. Echo burst out of the satchel. He didn't look like a cat or a scarf anymore. He looked like a tidal wave of ink. He grabbed the canisters of liquid nitrogen in midair and slammed them into the heart of the fire. Boom! The nitrogen expanded instantly. The sudden drop in temperature collided with the superheated air. The explosion wasn't fire, it was pressure. A massive shock wave of freezing fog blasted outward, extinguishing the flames instantly. Steam filled the atrium, thick, white, blinding fog. I can't see! Magnus roared from above. Cyrus! I yelled into the mist. Go! Cyrus didn't hesitate. He surrendered. He let the human side go. He let the king go. He let the beast out. A roar shook the spire. It wasn't a wolf's howl. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting. From the fog, a shadow rose. It was massive, the size of a house. A wolf made of pure, living darkness with eyes like dying stars. The shadow wolf leaped. Chapter 30, The Eclipse. Magnus never stood a chance against the dark. He was floating above the shattered ceiling, confused by the sudden fog, looking for a target to burn. He didn't see the shadow rising from the steam until it was too late. The shadow wolf launched itself from the upper walkway. It moved like liquid, defying gravity. Magnus turned, screaming, and threw a beam of pure sunlight at the beast. The light hit Cyrus's chest. It should have burned him. It should have incinerated him. But shadows don't burn. They consume. The shadow wolf opened its jaws, a cavern of endless void, and swallowed the light. The beam vanished. Then the wolf hit Magnus. They crashed onto the metal walkway in a tangle of fire and darkness. The impact crumpled the steel grate. I scrambled back, shielding my eyes. It was hard to watch. Magnus was bright, blindingly bright, struggling like a dying star. Cyrus was a black hole, wrapping around him, defecating the light. "You cannot kill the sun!" Magnus shrieked, his voice distorting. The wolf didn't roar. It whispered, a sound like 1,000 voices speaking at once. The sun sets. The night is eternal. Magnus screamed, and his physical form dissolved. He became what he always wanted to be, pure, blinding light. He tried to shoot upward, to escape. Cyrus bit down. The wolf's jaws clamped around the pillar of light. There was a flash, a silent reverse explosion where the energy imploded into darkness, and the light was swallowed whole. With the energy consumed, the physical anchor was gone. The wolf stood over the empty, crumpled suit that fluttered to the walkway. Magnus was gone. The fire in the atrium was out. The heat began to dissipate, sucked away by the void. The wolf turned its massive head toward me. Its eyes were pitch black. No gold, no recognition. It growled, a low rumble that vibrated in my bones. It took a step toward me. "Cyrus," I whispered, holding up my hand. "It's me." The wolf didn't know me. It only knew hunger. It had just eaten a sun god and it was still hungry. It crouched, ready to spring. "Echo!" I cried out. Echo zipped out of the fog. He landed on the wolf's nose. He formed a tiny, shadowy heart shape. The wolf paused. It sneezed. That tiny second of hesitation was all I needed. I ran forward. I didn't run away. I ran to him. I slammed my body against the massive, smoky fur of his chest. It was freezing cold. "Come back," I commanded, pressing my bleeding hand, the cut had reopened, against his fur. "Come back to the anchor." The wolf stiffened. The scent of blood and alchemy hit him. The blackness began to recede. The massive form shrank. The smoke condensed into flesh and bone. In seconds, I wasn't holding a monster. I was holding a man. Cyrus collapsed into my arms, naked, shivering, and covered in soot. We fell to the metal grate together. He gasped, sucking in air. He blinked. One eye was black, the other was gold. "Remy," he croaked. "I'm here," I sobbed, brushing the wet hair off his forehead. "I'm here." He looked at me, then at the empty suit where Magnus had been. "Did I eat him?" "Yeah," I laughed, a hysterical sound. "You definitely ate him." He groaned, resting his head on my shoulder. "I'm going to have incredible indigestion." "I have a potion for that," I promised, hugging him tight. He buried his face in my neck, inhaling deeply. "You smell like smoke," he murmured, "and peppermint, and home. And you," I whispered, kissing the top of his head, "have terrible breath." He laughed, a weak vibration against my chest. He pulled me closer. "Taste it yourself." Epilogue, The Night Garden, 6 months later. The bell above the door chimed. "Welcome to the night garden," I called out from the back room, wiping lavender oil off my hands. The new shop was beautiful. It was located on the ground floor of the spire, with huge glass windows that looked out onto the busy Chicago street. But inside, it was a sanctuary. Hanging vines, non-carnivorous, draped from the ceiling. Jars of glowing potions lined the shelves. Echo was napping on the counter, currently shaped like a fat, contented cat. "I'm looking for a remedy," a deep voice said. I smiled. I knew that voice. It still made my toes curl. I walked out to the front. Cyrus was leaning against the counter. He looked good. The grayness was gone forever. His skin was tan, his eyes a bright, healthy gold. He was wearing a suit, but he'd ditched the tie. He looked happy. "What seems to be the problem?" I asked, leaning on the counter opposite him. "My heart," he said dramatically. "It beats too fast, especially when my wife is nearby." I glanced at the ring on my finger, a band of obsidian with a vein of raw gold running through it. "I think that's a chronic condition," I said. "There's no cure." "Pity," he said. He reached across the counter and grabbed my hand, pulling me toward him. "I guess I'll just have to live with it." He kissed me. It tasted like coffee, rain, and everything good. "Lunch?" he asked, pulling back. "I can't," I said. "I have a client coming in for a truth serum." "Cancel it," he commanded softly, his eyes darkening with that familiar heat. Come upstairs. Barnaby misses you." We had finally gotten a real cat. Echo hated him. "Barnaby saw me this morning," I said. "Then come upstairs because the king commands it." I laughed, hopping over the counter to join him. "The king is bossy." "The queen loves it," he whispered against my ear. He walked me to the door, flipping the sign to closed. "By the way," he said, opening the door for me, "I checked my breath this morning." "And?" He grinned, the sunlight catching the gold in his eyes. "Minty fresh." I laughed, taking his hand as we walked out into the city we owned. "I'll be the judge of that." The end.